Hello, and welcome back to the Mike Merles Talks TTRPGs podcast. This week, I want to talk about a D&D topic, an approach to monster design that I personally follow. So, in my monster design, I never give monsters abilities that allow them to heal, and I just don't use resistance and immunity to anything unless I absolutely think it's really important or it comes with an interesting drawback. And this is for a really simple reason. When you are playing a game of Dungeons and Dragons, you only have so much time to actually play the game. Mechanics that restore hit points, that allow essentially a character's actions to come and go with just nothing happening outside of, say, okay, you missed, okay, that's going to happen, but you can account for missing in how you balanced your system and built your math. But having someone hit, which the system is counting on, hey, like you hit, you're going to do some damage, you're going to advance the fight to its end. Well, actually, now that just did nothing because of resistance or immunity or something like that. To me, that mechanic in an environment where you only have so much time to actually play the game really can undermine your ability to have a good time playing D&D or a TTRPG. Now, this doesn't apply to every game. This is really aimed at D&D 5th edition, just because the way the game is designed. The monsters essentially have enough hit points that the fights should typically take 3 rounds, and characters, more importantly, have enough abilities that their turns often take quite a while to execute. So fights can go really slow. So in a world where characters and monsters have a lot of hit points and turns can take a long time, having a turn just be, oh, nothing happened, can be a real drag. Now, this could also be an argument against missing, but like I said, the one thing about missing, and I'll do another episode on missing, why, kind of my thoughts on it, because right now there's kind of a lot of designers like the idea of, like, you never miss, you just do more or less damage. With a miss, you can account for how often the characters miss in your math, in your design. And a spoiler alert, D&D 5e math assumes you hit about 2/3 of the time. So in a typical 3-round fight, you are expected to miss once. And the thinking there is, well, if someone misses, yeah, probability is going to bounce around. Someone else might hit 3 times, so it ends up being, some fights you get lucky, some fights you get a little unlucky, but it should all come out in the wash. So that is why in 5e I don't like healing, and I don't like effects that just reduce damage, because we're already reducing damage with the accuracy roll, the roll to hit. If we're reducing damage by having you miss a certain amount of time, well, then converting some of your hits into effectively misses just slows things down. We're just making the fight take longer and frustrating the player. Now, again, one of the important things here is to think, when I'm designing my stuff for my games, I want to turn the time I have to put into the machine that is Dungeons and Dragons. The time I put in, I want to turn the crank on the game and have that the most efficient transference of that time into entertainment. Like, I am having fun. So things that are, for me, clearly not fun about playing any role-playing game, looking up rules, doing math, trying to, doing something and having just absolutely nothing happen, nothing moves forward despite doing a bunch of work. So essentially, if especially with healing, I'm doing all the handling time. I'm spending all this handling time rolling attacks, rolling, saving throws, rolling damage, adding it up, subtracting your hit points. I've put in all the work, and then, oh, that just got undone because, like, this flunky in the encounter, maybe an NPC, cleric, or something like that, just healed the guy you hit. So all that time was wasted. So I find that really just annoying because I don't have infinite time to play these games. So a lot of my design instead does the opposite. It focuses on accelerating the game. I want to increase the game's danger. I want to make things a little bit swingier, a little bit faster, a little more lethal. I'd rather give you a bonus to damage, say to a monster, than give it the ability to just basically erase someone's turn. So as an example, I might say with a monster that I'm designing, like, okay, normally this creature would have, say, fire resistance or even fire immunity. Instead, what I'll say is, hey, if it takes fire damage, it instead goes into overdrive mode. It takes that fire energy and turns it into something useful. So, for instance, I might say for a red dragon, if it takes fire damage, the next time it uses its breath weapon, that damage is maximized. For another creature, I might say, let's say this creature is immune to acid damage. Okay, well, if I hit it with acid, it absorbs the acid into its body, and on its turn, it gets a free extra ranged acid attack as it sprays the acid back at you. It still took the acid damage, it still got melted, but then it can actually take that element, once the sort of acid is burned out, and turn it to an extra option it gets. This then makes your damage types a little more interesting for the players because you can say, hey, using fire or acid on this creature isn't a great idea, but I might risk it. Let's say I have a really powerful acid attack, and I think it's going to just finish this creature off. It's not going to get a chance to use an extra ranged attack, or it's not going to get a chance to use its maximized breath weapon. The other fun thing this then enables is if I'm building an encounter with multiple creatures, I might have a red dragon, and it's got some kobold cultists around it, and those kobolds are waving torches around, and they want to smack the dragon with their torch to maximize its breath weapon. So now in an encounter, if the players are thinking, hey, we have this dragon, these kobolds, hey, maybe we want to take out these kobolds, because this dragon is going to be hitting us with maximized breath weapons. Now, to be fair, maximized breath weapon might just be a bad example, because that could just be instant TPK at a lot of levels, but you get my drift. Something that takes an attack and it makes it much more dangerous. Let's say instead of maximizing, we're going to do 4 extra dice of damage, whatever the case may be. So I like that approach because it preserves the game's pace. We keep moving forward at sort of, speed as intended. And it, rather than take that energy attack, and say, oh, this just doesn't work, use something else, we're introducing a cost benefit for the player to think, do I want to do this at this drawback, or do I want to try something else? It means our player, maybe who doesn't have many other energy type options, they're not completely hosed. They're just, you're doing your damage, you're helping end the encounter, you're keeping things moving forward, but now we've added some complexity on top of it, some extra threat. Now, when it comes to healing, I have a similar thing. Rather than have a, say, evil cleric who's running around healing his allies, I'd rather do things like when this cleric type leader sort of guy casts he has a spell that maybe lets his minions get an extra move, or some of them get an extra attack. A lot of those sort of classic abilities you see in leader type creatures in TTRPGs. Those to me are a lot more fun. It essentially, and you're kind of back in the same position of the players, thinking, hey, do we take out this guy who's buffing the team, or do we take out the team? And then add a little texture and a little bit more, tactical priority. Like, well, how are we going to tackle this? Maybe we can use a control spell on the minions and then focus fire on the leader to burn them down while also mitigating the effect of his boosts and so on. But the idea being you're giving players more texture in the encounter, you're giving them some more options, and you're making them think about how they're going to use things. So that's my overall take. I personally don't like using, healing and resistance style mechanics in 5e. If I use a monster off the shelf, I just strip those abilities out. I ignore them. I do have an exception that I am testing. I am not completely happy with it, but I would like... Well, let's see. I'm hoping it works. I think it'd be kind of fun. So one exception to this is regeneration. The regeneration mechanic I'm messing around with right now is if a creature isn't dead at the start of its turn, it regains all hit points. So effectively, regeneration is you have to kill this creature. You have to just focus fire on it. If you don't do enough damage, you've lost all your progress. Now, I do worry, okay, this could just end up being a slog. But I think what that does is it turns combat a little, maybe, if it's working. And I said, now, caveat, I don't know if this is going to work. It might be a terrible mechanic. I haven't really playtested it a lot. I've done a little bit with some weaker monsters, and it's been fine. But for a boss monster, it might be a terrible idea. It might be just very difficult to get this number right. But the thinking there is kind of thinking back to that, the leader, monster who's just buffing everyone else, who do you attack first? Trying to create a similar, easily understood but potentially interesting textured tactical challenge. We know that attacking this guy is a waste of time unless we're going to focus fire and destroy him. So how does that change our approach to the encounter? How does it change how we do things? So that's a similar thing. Now, again, that it is the place where it might just be erasing the player's progress. It could just drag the game out. It might get in the way of my mission of turning time spent playing RPGs into enjoyable time, having fun. But we'll see. That's something I'm going to be playing around with, and we'll see where it goes from there. I am overall, I'm not a big fan of regeneration. I think it's kind of gimmicky, And I think as a player, it just like I think it was kind of interesting like 40 years ago, 50 years ago, when the first time players ran into it and had to solve the puzzle of how do I kill this thing. Um, and I think that might just be the actual puzzle we're trying to solve. But yeah, so we'll see where I end up with generation. But those are my thoughts on resistances, immunities, and monsters healing. I hope they're useful, especially if you found like your encounters are getting kind of sloggy. Part of it might be if a resistance is kicking in often in an encounter, you might just be strictly doubling the amount of real world time it takes to finish that encounter without maybe actually making the game any more enjoyable. So those are my thoughts. That's some of my design approach. Hope it proves useful. And until next time, keep gaming.